welcome everyone to another version or another edition of our monthly briefing. We're discussing what happened in November, and it seems like almost each and every month we have quite a full list of interesting events and developments. Definitely living in interesting times. Today we have a slight shift in the leading role of the webinar. I'm playing an avatar to Stephanie, who was not able to join us because she's currently at the same moment there is an interesting conference on international law and digitalization in Geneva, and hosted by the Geneva Internet Platform, so Steph is there. But I'll do my best to run through the key developments, and I'll have some support from my colleagues, Marilia, Sorina, and Arvin, to cover particular topics. So let's start from the beginning. What were the main events in November? There is a solid list of events, but I'll focus quickly on just a few of them. The first one is certainly the IGF. So we had the 13th UN Internet Governance Forum, this time taking place in Paris at the UNESCO premises. And it was quite an interesting event, particularly because of the context. Last year we had the IGF in Geneva. Next year we're going to have it in Berlin, and this year it was in Paris. So we see the sort of Europe trying to strengthen the IGF politically to some extent. And this is the underlying message that we saw at the IGF as well, sort of a takeaway. Probably the most important part of that, or the most visible part of that, was the very beginning when we had the welcome speeches by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and French President Emmanuel Macron. Both of them, in a way, suggested that we need to strengthen the IGF, to improve it. The previous improvements of the IGF have been, of course, acknowledged, and particularly the specific features of the IGF that basically were the IGF pioneered, such as remote participation, dynamic coalition, best practice forum, internet governance hubs, and other policy innovations. But there is a feeling that there might need to be a sort of a political support to the IGF to remain relevant in the years to come. Paris Call, which was launched during the IGF, is another sort of lightning moment of the IGF. We'll get back to the Paris Call shortly after, which is mainly related to cybersecurity issues. Most of the topics that we used to see at the IGF were again in forefront: cybercrime, illegal content, and so on. And Emmanuel Macron also mentioned or touched upon a couple of them. But some of the possible takeaways that we can see, or predictions, if we can dare to put them, from Macron's speech and from the overall atmosphere, is that we might see governments stepping up more into the regulation of the various internet issues, and that might be the trend that is coming. And in that direction, we will probably also have to see, or will see, private sector getting ready for these possible new regulations, and that maybe self-regulation might not be enough anymore, as the trends show. At the same time, civil society might need to strengthen the role and vigilance in shaping these policies by the governments to the extent possible. Some of the missing issues at the IGF that we can see, there was a lot about future, there was a lot about emerging technologies, artificial intelligence. We'll touch on that in a few minutes. But there was maybe a little bit of a lack of focus on future generations, or the presence of the future generations talking about the future was actually something that was a little bit missing that we could see. And there were also many synergies, which is quite interesting, and references even to digital cooperation mentioned as well in the Paris Call. So that might be an interesting hook or anchor to the UN high-level panel on digital cooperation. As I'm sure many of you know, we try to follow and report from each day of the IGF, and just yesterday we released the final report of from the IGF. Now little bit more details, 12 pages if I'm not wrong. So I encourage you to visit the Digital Watch website and GIP website and look for the final report from the IGF for more details. Another key event which basically went through the month in a way is the ITU Plenipotentiary Conference 2018. The Plenipot Conference is basically the main or the highest level event which happens every 4 years to set the agenda and the main priorities, action plans basically for the ITU in the next period. The messages or the feeling from the ITU Plenipot also coming quite vocally from some of the reports we could see, from some of the transcripts and speeches, including by the chairs of working groups, is that probably more than ever we are seeing a big divide, geographical divide and political divide between the main blocks. The blocks are changing a little bit. This time we maybe saw a bit of increasing gap between Latin American, European states on one hand, and then Africa and Arab region on the other, with Asia a little bit divided. We haven't seen that much of the influence of China and Russia, at least not clearly. And the main battle, if we can say, is actually something that we are seeing for years in the ITU, which is the future mandate or the mandate of the ITU. To what extent the ITU should still stick to telecommunications primarily and not go much into the discussing policies and regulation related to internet, and particularly the emerging technologies, the artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, and other. And there we see the biggest division. Some of the results which we can briefly run through is that there was an intent to more precisely describe the limits of the ITU involvement in the artificial intelligence work, and that resolution didn't go through. We know that ITU is quite active in the field of artificial intelligence as well. There was one of the resolutions which did go through, even though quite watered down, was on the over-the-top providers, so the internet service and content providers, which is a little bit of a shift from telecommunications, but it is there was a clear understanding that the OTTs, the over-the-top providers, and their work impact the work of the telecoms. So, looking back at the Plenipot, we are probably seeing something that's a bigger global signal that this gap between the regions or main regions of the world when it comes to the internet regulation is still quite big. And then, of course, there were a number of other interesting events. We don't have time to go into each one of them, but you can see more of that on the Digital Watch website. Moving on to what happened, what are the main developments in November, and again our sort of barometer trying to show the pressure when it comes to certain policy issues and policy areas. So briefly run through some of them, and then we'll go into details of some other of the main developments. When it comes to global IG architecture, we mentioned the Paris call. We'll get back to that, and also the contract for the web by Sir Tim Berners-Lee in a couple of minutes. There was an interesting or useful report by the OECD when it comes to the gender divide, where basically the OECD reconfirms that women have less access to technology, services, and educational opportunities in the ICT than men. Something to definitely think about more. Then when it comes to security, this is one of the lead trends of the month, so we'll get back to that topic in a couple of minutes, as well as when it comes to e-commerce and the internet economy. There is an update when it comes to digital rights, and we saw the UN General Assembly, which was quite active in its work this autumn. So the third committee saw the resolution which calls on the states to prevent privacy violations. And I might invite briefly Marilia to just explain it in a sentence or two what this actually means and what was on the agenda. Marilia.
Thank you, Vlada. Actually, as you mentioned, this resolution on privacy in the digital age is a new resolution in a series of resolutions that the third committee has approved on this topic. The third committee has been very active in the field of privacy, and we noticed that their actions intensified after the Snowden revelation. So they approved resolutions in 2013, 14, 16, and a new one in 18. And these resolutions have increasingly been shaping the way that not only the Commission on Human Rights, the Committee on Human Rights, but also the UN General Assembly are seeing and shaping the right to privacy. The resolution, it tackles 2 points, the responsibility of states and the responsibility of private actors. When it comes to the responsibility of states, it focuses on data retention and the limits that data retention should have on national legislations. It focuses on surveillance of communications, and surveillance has been a topic that is present in all these resolutions on privacy that have been approved by the UN, mentioning the limits that surveillance must have, that it must comply with the rule of law and with human rights. And it also calls member states to approve national data protection legislations. We know that many countries still lack specific regulations on the national level that deal with privacy and data protection. When it comes to companies, the resolution calls companies to inform individuals more clearly when it comes to the collection and the sharing of personal data. It invites companies to reinforce their commitments with principles that are important to privacy and data protection, such as necessity and purpose. The data should be collected and used for the purpose that was informed to the end user in the first place. And a novelty of this resolution is that it tackles specifically the right to privacy when it comes to privacy incorporated in the design of machine learning and artificial intelligence products. So it's sort of an extension of the idea of privacy by design in the field of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And in this field, the committee says that it will continue to work on machine learning and artificial intelligence in the upcoming years. So we can expect that this specific topic will be present in future resolutions of the third committee as well. Over to you, Vlada.
Thank you, Marilia. Probably that is another clear example of government stepping in more into the field of regulation, even on the highest level, such as the UN General Assembly committees. A quick focus back on one of the interesting aspects of the month when it comes to the e-commerce and economic developments is actually the world of cryptocurrencies, and where we saw a Bitcoin value going down because of a couple of events. One being the splitting in cryptocurrencies, and I'll pass the floor briefly to Arvin to update us on the 2 or 3 key developments when it comes to cryptocurrency and blockchain, and what can we expect, or what does that signal? Arvin.
Thanks, Vlada. As you said, this month was actually one of the turmoil month in the cryptocurrencies, of course, because the overall global price was down for the Bitcoin, the most prominent cryptocurrency, and everyone is taking the notion. What actually happened is that the 4th largest cryptocurrency, called Bitcoin Cash, which actually emerged from the Bitcoin main fork last year, is now dividing further and split further following a dispute over the consensus mechanisms. On one side, there are 2 sides now struggling for the premises on Bitcoin Cash cryptocurrency. On one side, there is Roger Ver and Jihan Wu, 2 prominent people from the Bitcoin industry who are actually have a large mining facilities and put a lot of its power, which was secured, which was dedicated to the Bitcoin. It was now put to this new hash war between Bitcoin Cash, 2 versions of Bitcoin Cash, one named Bitcoin Cash ABC and another named Bitcoin Cash Satoshi Visions. What was the main dispute between these 2 groups is actually on how to scale Bitcoin Cash blockchain in order to facilitate unlimited numbers of data, or unlimited number of transactions. On the second side, promoting Bitcoin Cash Satoshi visions, meaning blockchains without the physical boundary of 1 megabyte, 10 megabytes, or whatever. That side is represented in this quarrel by Professor Craig Wright, who claimed last year that he is Satoshi Nakamoto himself, and another person is Calvin Ayre, the Canadian billionaire who actually made his fortune in gambling industry and was one of the prominent mining figures after that. So that's the one thing which is actually pushing markets also down. This struggle is still ongoing for the hash power. Of course, the chain with the most hash power will let's say, win. Another interesting development is related to the Visa's announcement of a new product which will surround digital identity, and it's actually going to be launched in the first quarter 2019. Is one-of-a-kind distributed ledger-based platform which will be run by Hyperledger, the company which is open source software blockchain run by and maintained by a Linux Foundation. So this new distributed ledger will actually give financial institutions a fast, secure way to process cross-border business-to-business payments globally. So Visa will actually start with this the first quarter 2019, and they had official launch and official announcement at the beginning of November. And third, not stated here in a barometer, but really development which will move forward in this field, happened actually day after yesterday or the day prior, is that in United States, the states of Ohio will actually allow everyone to pay their taxes via cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. So this is going to be the first state-accepted Bitcoin payments, and it may move forward other states and countries to actually go and allow tax bills to be paid by cryptocurrencies. Vlada?
Thank you, Arvin. First of all, it's quite interesting to see that when we discuss the governance of cryptocurrencies, that actually there is quite much possible influence by individuals or groups that might have more or less money. So the governance definitely is an issue. And then secondly, that we continuously see the pendulum going back and forth, either mistrust or lack of trust in cryptocurrencies, or additional boosts, such as the US example that you brought up, which is quite fresh, and thank you for bringing fresh news to the briefing. Moving on to jurisdiction and legal issues, one of the lead updates of this month is actually France, which reached the agreement with Facebook to allow government officials to monitor companies' hate speech policies and removal procedures, which is an interesting example of cooperation between the private sector and the government. Sorina might bring a couple of more bits on that. Sorina?
Thank you, Vlada. Hello, everyone. Just briefly about this update. I think we all know at this point that many European governments have been asking Facebook and other similar online platforms to actually put more efforts into tackling hate speech and other type of what governments describe as problematic online content, and this is where the French initiative fits into, I would say. So President Macron announced an agreement with Facebook for a period of 6 months, during which French regulators, or representatives of the French regulators, will monitor the company's policies and tools dedicated to addressing hate speech online via the Facebook platform. What the French government expects through this testing period is to get a better understanding of how these policies and tools function, and then get some input into what kind of regulatory and legal measures they can put into practice to actually fight online hate speech. It is interesting that Facebook described this initiative as a co-regulatory approach, and actually the Vice President for Global Affairs of Facebook reiterated the point that was made earlier by the CEO of Facebook, saying that we should all actually acknowledge the fact that with the Internet being more and more present in the everyday life of individual users, we should also be acknowledging the fact that regulation is coming and more regulation is coming. So that's why Facebook is more open to cooperating with governments. So I guess we will see how this cooperation with the French government works and what the French government will be coming up with after these 6 months of seeing how Facebook works on dealing with hate speech. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Serena. As you said, a good example, again, of governments being or stepping into the regulatory field, but also of the partnership between the governments and private sector and managing to find the agreements or the way forward for both sides. So that's probably something that we can say it is quite an interesting and positive example. Moving on to the last bucket of issues. When it comes to infrastructure, the interesting bit is that Elon Musk's SpaceX received support or approval by the U.S. Federal Communication Council to send over 7,000 very low Earth orbit satellites to provide global internet connectivity from space. And in that sense, we probably can see sort of the increased competition and battle over global connectivity. We saw in the previous years the plans by Facebook, by Google, and so on. So basically, SpaceX is jumping into that battle. Moving on to net neutrality, couple of, rather US-based updates related to the debates over there, but nothing major on a global level. And finally, when it comes to the new technologies, we are going to see, or we are going to hear more on that in a couple of minutes when we move to the trends. So moving to what are the policy trends, we have 3 key policy trends of this month. And I'll start with the first one, which is cybersecurity, high on the agenda. Couple of main developments. One is, and we touched upon that briefly in at the beginning of the webinar, is that we have the Paris call, so the sort of a document or a high-level declaration launched by President Emmanuel Macron at the beginning of the IGF. The full name is Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace. And it basically outlines some of the common principles for securing cyberspace. It uses, to a large extent, some of the language that was Tunis agenda already had when it comes to respective roles of states and other stakeholders. It basically supports or approves or reaffirms the work of the UN group of governmental experts when it comes to the application of international law to cyberspace. The declaration underlines the importance of the Budapest Convention as the key tool for combating cybercrime. It stresses a bit more the responsibility of private sector for the security of the products. It calls for broader digital cooperation and capacity building, again a possible link to the UN high-level panel on digital cooperation. The interesting bit is that it particularly outlines or invites to prevent damaging the integrity of the public core of the Internet, as well as prevent foreign interventions in electoral processes, which is basically the 2 proposed norms by the Global Commission on Cyberspace, which we can see somewhat integrated in the Paris Call. Besides it, the declaration calls for the preventing of the intellectual property theft, and if we can put it, economic espionage to some extent, and also asks for preventing non-state actors from hacking back, which is an interesting focus on the non-state actors. There were some concerns that this might run as yet another policy process or dialogue process when it comes to cybersecurity, but the end of the call actually, or the declaration, wraps up with saying that the next iteration of discussion of the implementation of the call, or possibly the upgrades of the call, will be done during the Paris Peace Forum in 2019, as well as during the IGF in 2019 in Berlin. So we see that this process might actually be done within the scope of the IGF, which is a relevant conclusion. It's worth saying that there is a huge number of signatories. Some of the main major internet companies and a great number of countries have already signed it. What we see missing is currently that the US, Russia, and China, as members of the P5, are basically not within this group yet. The second important update when it comes to cybersecurity is, of course, the General Assembly work on, and all eyes were on the General Assembly work in the first committee when it comes to a possible continuation of the work of the UN group of governmental experts developing norms of behavior in cyberspace. And we actually saw two resolutions, competing resolutions to a large extent. One put ahead by Russia, which was voted in favor. And the resolution basically invites not for the GG, but for the open-ended, for the establishment of the open-ended working group, which should convene in 2019, basically open to all the governments of the UN, or the member states of the UN, which will hold intersessional consultations with other stakeholders, which was explicitly put in, business, NGOs, and academia, and will report to the UN General Assembly in autumn 2020. The group is basically mandated to further develop on the norms from the 2015 GG report, yet it doesn't explicitly call on the GG report 2015. Instead, it basically quotes again all the norms within the GG, but with somewhat different wording than what we had in the GG report of 2015, which is interesting to note. At the same time, our competing resolution was the one by the US, which basically calls for continuation of the UN group of governmental experts. With the same mandate, basically, to study the norms further, confidence building measures, capacity building, focus more maybe on implementation of the existing norms, which is something that we heard previously as a position of the US and the partners. And it is invited to report to the UN General Assembly in autumn 2021. It suggests, particularly, that's a difference from previous years, that there will be, that UNODA is basically asked to conduct consultations with regional organizations, and namely African Union, European Union, Organization of American States, OSCE, and the Asian Regional Forum. So not the Asian, but the Asian Regional Forum. And that UN GG chair will organize 2 open-ended information consultative meetings with all the interested states. Interestingly, we don't see in this US proposal any mention of the consultations with other stakeholders. And also it's interesting that this resolution actually requires the states to submit how they see the international law applies to cyberspace, in a way asking for written statements in order to clarify that. Both resolutions went through in the first committee. We'll see how this goes on, but it seems like we might actually now have 2 mechanisms instead of 1. The Global Commission on Stability of Cyberspace has come up with 6 new proposed norms of state behavior and behavior of non-state actors, so-called Singapore package. And these norms focus on, particularly on tampering with products, so sort of a backdoor issue, vulnerability disclosure and responsibility for vulnerability disclosure, botnets and handling botnets or combating them, increasing cyber hygiene and culture, cybersecurity culture, and the conduct of offensive cyber operations by non-state actors. So there is a specific focus on non-state actors. The European Commission has updated its cyber defense framework, basically focusing on defense capabilities, protection of the EU common security and defense policy, communication and information networks, training exercise, and so on. Interesting development comes from Asian. So the Asian states basically had 2 joint statements, one with Russia and the other one with the US. Both of them basically supporting the development and elaboration of the existing norms of responsible behavior, mentioning UNGG in one context, not in the other, mentioning the need to combat criminal and terrorist activities, and so on. And lastly, even though it doesn't, in a narrow sense, fit in the cybersecurity trend, but in a broad sense it does, we mentioned the call for the contract for the web, which was opened or announced by Tim Berners-Lee and the World Wide Web Foundation, where basically the contract for the web currently lays out a number of basic core principles when it comes to the roles of the governments, the companies, and the citizens related to open internet, security, stability of the net, and human rights. And it is announced that the contract will run through the process throughout next year to actually be shaped and then put in forward for signature by interested parties. Currently, we know that Facebook and Google already stood or supported the contract for the web, and we'll see how that goes on in future. In brief, we see the governments pushing the norms. For the new norms, we see growing collaboration between the governments and private sector, which is a good signal, and we see the special focus on the norms development when it comes to cyber incidents. That's when it comes to the cybersecurity area. And then moving to the second trend is actually the artificial intelligence and developments related to artificial intelligence, and particularly ethics and responsibility. And I'm passing the floor to Sorina to update us a little bit on the artificial intelligence update. Sorina.
Thank you again, Vlada. So back to AI, which is kind of a buzzword these days. Everyone is talking about AI, whether they understand or not the concept and the mechanism behind it. So what happened in November? There was a bit of focus on the relation between ethics and the development of AI. It happened at the IGF and also in other contexts, so we will be talking a bit about this. To start with, the French president in his speech at the IGF mentioned artificial intelligence, of course, among many other things he spoke about during his opening speech there. And interestingly, he started with a call for more cooperation and investment in artificial intelligence, especially within Europe. And maybe as a follow-up on that, soon after the IGF Germany announced considerable investment into artificial intelligence over the next 6 to 7 years. But back to Macron, so he called for more cooperation and investment in artificial intelligence. But he also announced that he will be pushing forward with an idea of creating a strong international initiative on AI similar to the well-known Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. He mentioned that although this panel should be intergovernmental, it should also work in close cooperation with the civil society, scientists, and innovators, but also involve intergovernmental organizations such as the OECD for the economic dimension of artificial intelligence, but also UNESCO mainly for the ethical dimension of artificial intelligence. And what Macron also said was that one of the issues that this panel should be looking carefully at is the relation between artificial intelligence and the ethical principles or concepts. And he said, and I'm quoting, there can be no artificial intelligence if reflection with an ethical dimension is not conducted. So he emphasized that reflecting on the ethical, technical, and scientific dimensions of artificial intelligence should be done in conjunction, and this idea of an intergovernmental panel on AI should be looking carefully into these issues. Now, I guess it remains to be seen whether and when this panel will be created and what exactly it will be dealing with. And of course, it was not surprisingly that artificial intelligence was actually, I think, the main topic at the IGF in Paris. It was discussed in specific dedicated sessions, but also in sessions that were supposed to deal with other issues, but also touched on artificial intelligence. And quite a lot of these discussions also mentioned ethics and the need to make sure that ethical principles are taken into consideration in the development and use of artificial intelligence. There was, of course, a lot of talks about the benefits and challenges of AI, how AI can be used in different sectors, from public services and agriculture to environmental protection, multilingual, cybersecurity, and many other areas. But one sort of echoing message from most of these discussions was that AI application must be pro-people if we really want them to benefit society. And for these applications to be pro-people, ethical and legal challenges need to be seriously considered. And one way to do this, it was said in many of the discussion, was to make sure that ethics and human rights are considered as guiding principles in the design and use of artificial intelligence. Now, there was a lot of talk about we should be doing this and we should be making sure that AI is embedded into the design and use of that ethics is embedded into the design and use of AI, but there were many open questions, and of course they remained open after the IGF as well. So which ethical aspects are we actually looking at when we talk about including them in the development of AI? Can we really embed ethics into the code which is behind AI algorithms? And how about the fact that there is actually no universal agreement of ethical concept and principles? So how do we deal with these questions when we get to the bottom of the problem of making sure that we include ethics at the end of the day into how the artificial intelligence systems are being developed and used? And there was also one interesting discussion about the relation between law and ethics. How we should be taking into account of both ethics and the legal frameworks into the design of artificial intelligence. And during the IGF debate, some argued that while some ethical rules are codified into law, ethics actually go much beyond law and should not be seen as a substitute of regulations and legislations. So therefore, when we discuss about how to ensure that artificial intelligence is pro-people, we should be keeping into account both ethical principles but actual law as well, because the law is already written and we know what that means. And interestingly, this interplay between ethics and law was also underlined by the UN Rapporteur on Extreme Privacy and Human Rights and outside the IGF discussions. He made the statement following a visit he had to the UK, where he also talked about artificial intelligence. And he mentioned that ethical frameworks actually have limitations because, again, we are not really sure what they mean. There is no kind of universal agreement of what the various ethical principles mean. But on the other hand, human rights are pretty much clear. They are embedded in law, even in international law. So his conclusion was that the use of AI, including by governments, needs to be done by the rule of law, primarily and only after by ethical codes, whatever we mean by ethical codes. So in brief, the discussions around artificial intelligence continue. On the good side, the bad side, how the technology is evolving, ethical aspects are taken into consideration, but questions remain. How to include ethics into the development of AI, what is actually an ethical concept, and what about the law? We should be making sure that law is the first one we take into account. So we will be keeping an eye on developments in the field of AI. I'm guessing you all know, if not, we are telling you now. We are keeping a close look on developments on the Digital Watch, so have a look there and we'll make sure to update you on all developments also related to ethics and their consideration into AI development. Thank you.
Thank you, Serena. Yes, AI is definitely a huge buzzword and so many things are really happening around it. The IGF was a particular example where basically the first main session was focused on emerging technologies in AI and directly tackling ethics and whether that can be coded in a way and embedded into code and so on. So quite an interesting area. As Serena said, we are going to follow up on that closely within the Digital Watch. So make sure that you check it regularly and see what's happening. And then the third trend of the month is actually the economic aspects and all the issues related to the future of labor, the models of the labor, and policies around that. So I'm inviting now Marilia to step in and shed a little bit more light on the developments when it comes to economy and economic issues in November. Marilia.
Thank you, Vlada. Well, under economic issues, as you said, the gig economy had a great space on the agenda. The gig economy, which is characterized by a labor force that has different types of contracts, not permanent contracts, but temporary ones, very flexible relations of work. And there's a growing realization that the current labor laws that we have are not enough. They are not fit to protect the workers in this context of the gig economy. So the recent developments that we had this month are related basically to the publication of important reports and research, to the proposal of new laws, and to the appearance of other court rulings that are helping to shape the future of work. The OECD was an organization which is working a lot on the theme of the future of work, and they have recently published a report on the future of social protection of online gig workers. And basically the report shows with data how the patterns of work are increasingly different from long-term works, employments to employments that are short-term, to people who are self-employed. And they show how the traditional protection systems are not enough and are not designed to protect workers in this new context. And against this backdrop, we see that some countries have started to move towards regulation of the gig economy. This has happened in the UK, which has a very large number of workers in the gig economy, and they are proposing new rules in the field. Basically, what the rules try to do is to make some traditional rights applied in the context of the gig economy to protect workers. So, for instance, there is a new proposal that says that when a gig economy worker is working with a company informally for a period of 12 months, uninterruptedly, he would be entitled to receive a contract with fixed hours. This is one of the proposals of the regulation. Another one is to reduce the context of extreme flexibility in which these workers operate. So when they have, for instance, cancelled shifts, they would receive some compensation for that, which doesn't take place nowadays, and it makes it very hard for workers to plan their income and budget. So countries are moving in the direction of protecting the workers. We need to see how this proposal coming from the UK will evolve. And last but not least, we see that some countries are also moving to make decisions related to the gig economy and the future of work. Some issues have already arrived in the courts, and the courts are helping to shape how the future of work and these workers in the gig economy are going to be protected. So in Australia, for instance, there was a recent court ruling against the food delivery company Foodora that initially misclassified one of the riders that delivers food as an independent contractor. And the decision of the court says that he was not carrying on his own trade and business. Instead, he was working for Foodora itself. Therefore, he was entitled to receive compensations in the form of salaries and unpaid wages, for example. So this is a court decision in a specific case, but we can expect that it will impact other cases related to this part of the gig economy. For instance, let's see if that will influence rulings that are pending on Uber Eats or Deliveroo, for instance. And it could also impact other areas of the gig economy by helping to shape how the rights of these new workers will be seen in the future, and if there will be indeed an extension of the traditional rights to protect these new workers in this more precarious context. So this is a topic that is evolving very fast, and one that we will be certainly following next month. Vlada.
Thank you, Marilia. And thank you for explaining what the gig economy is. I needed to Google it yesterday to be able to make sure that I get it correctly. So many new terms which are popping up. But we are covering this also within the Digital Watch regularly. So invitation for everyone to check what we have on developments. Okay, those were the three trends, and now wrapping up this part of the webinar basically with what's coming, and at the same time, as Sorina just placed in the text box. If anyone has any comments, questions, now is the time to ask them so we can read them and run through them before the end. What is coming in December and January? Well, basically, luckily, the pressure is coming down in December and hopefully in January, so we're not having that many events. But there are a couple of that we should mention. Couple of days, the G7 Multi-Stakeholder Conference on AI is taking place in Montreal, which is quite an interesting development. It's worth saying that Macron basically will most likely build on the outcomes of the Montreal meeting once France takes over G7 presidency next year, and he sort of mentioned to some extent that he might think about establishing or creating the AI body which could work like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, some sort of intergovernmental panel on AI, which would be interesting to see. The second important event is Africa E-Commerce Week, the regional dialogue taking place in Nairobi, so an important regional event. And then lastly, the OECD Global Forum on Digital Security for Prosperity. So we are seeing also OECD helping discussions on security in digital space. It's interesting to note that in most of the OECD work, we see the phrase digital security bringing more of the positive and service-based security rather than cybersecurity, which might be more threatening in the other contexts. When it comes to the Geneva Internet Platform and DiploFoundation events, we are not still going for vacations. We still have a couple of events or developments on our side that you can follow. One is the report, the final report of the IGF, which is just out, so it's available at Digital Watch, dig.watch/IGF 2018. Quite a comprehensive report. I invite you to run through. Currently, what's ongoing is reporting from the UN Forum on Business and Human Rights in Geneva. You can follow on that as well. Similar exercises we had for the IGF, a little bit smaller scale. And then the Public International Law Day, which is just happening in Geneva. That's why Stephanie is not here today with us. The newsletter, Geneva Digital Watch November issue, is available. And then what's ongoing, two things, one in Geneva, basically, the online course, the course for Geneva people, Introduction to Digital Policy and Diplomacy. And then in mid-December and December, we expect to get the final report of the Geneva Dialogue on Responsible Behavior, the big workshop which took place in Geneva with a lot of international actors from all the stakeholders discussing and mapping the roles and responsibilities of different actors in terms of international peace and security and cyberspace. So look for that. We'll get back to that soon. Before I open the floor or check with Serena what the comments and questions were, just a reminder that we basically we will have the roundup of developments of the year somewhere in the early January, and that we're skipping the briefing in the end of December. We should celebrate a little bit the New Year's, and then we'll see you back in January. Okay, time for your comments and questions. Serena has been following on some of the inputs in the chat. Serena, over to you to see if we have any open questions or comments. Serena.
Not really. We only had a brief discussion on paying taxes with cryptocurrency. I'll go back to that comment. Okay, so someone was asking about why only paying taxes with Bitcoin and not basically allowing the payment of every kind of services and products, and I think Arvin replies to that. And then there was another comment about a similar initiative in the town of Zug, and that was all. So if anyone has any comments or questions, please now is the time to add them.
Thank you, Serena. Well, I think basically Arvin did respond to the question on the taxes as a sort of a recognition of the state as one way of legitimate way of payments. But we had another example from Zug, and of course I remember that we did have a chance to buy some coffee and food in Geneva as well with crypto, with Bitcoin. So things are progressing when it comes to the application as well. And then, okay, if anyone has any other questions or comments, you can post. In the meantime, or just sort of a closing of this global part, we are now moving on to the regional development. So we prepared a couple of updates from the regions, and Arvin will run through the regional developments of the month in the next couple of minutes. Arvin, floor is yours.
Thank you, Vlada, and thank you all for participating. As a near to end part, as we usually do, it's local hubs and regional perspectives. These regional IG developments from the main world region and presented here to you. First, we will hear from the with Asia updates. Sita Lakshmi with Asian agreement will update us on an ASEAN meeting, an agreement on electronic commerce, and an update from India. So Sita, next to you.
Hello, greetings from Indonesia. I would like to update you on two things. The first is about the new agreement within Southeast Asia countries, ASEAN, to create more ease in doing business. During the ASEAN summit that held in Singapore this month, ASEAN signed an agreement on electronic commerce to strengthen trust and confidence in online transactions and help state members to seize opportunities to grow their economies. This relates with the research published in November, sponsored by Google. It said that technology in this region is huge. It's a home for a cumulative 650 million people, and the region's digital economy forecast to triple in size and reach $240 billion in the next 7 years. The agreement, finalized after 9 rounds of negotiations, started last June. The agreement will encourage paperless trading between businesses and governments. This can generate more rapid and efficient transactions in ASEAN. Business can also access and move data across borders more easily, subject to appropriate safeguards. Specific for that case, ASEAN has taken steps to promote better consumer and personal data protection through the use of online dispute resolution mechanisms to facilitate the resolutions of e-commerce claims. Now, let's move to India. As you have remember, WhatsApp has an agreement with Government of India in limiting number of forwarding messages to maximum 5 chats per day. BBC this month released research on that specific subject. The main questions to answer is, why does the ordinary citizen spread fake news without verifications? BBC had extensive access over 7 days period, allowing the researchers to examine the kinds of material they share, whom they share it, and how often. The BBC discovered that socio-political identity plays a key role in sharing of fake news, especially for those on the right. While there are multiple identities emerging within the right, they are all bound by the common narratives. On the other hand, there is no real unified sense of left identity in India. Other findings discovered that validation of identity trumps verification of facts. There are 4 types of narratives in fake news message that are particularly effective. I just named 2, such as Hindu power and superiority, and preservations and revival. That's the update from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sita. That was Sita with the updates from the Asia region. Next, we will hear from Grace. She will update us with the African updates from the Africa continent. Grace will actually focus on the ITU Plenipot and the African IGF. Grace?
Welcome to Updates from Africa, and this month a highlight of 3 meetings that Africans took place in. The first is the ITU Plenipotentiary, where the African Regional Group, which is organized under the Africa Telecommunications Union, was following several issues, and they had common proposals on issues such as cybersecurity, Internet of Things, and Internet governance. They also made a draft proposal on regulation of over-the-top services. And as we have highlighted previously, several African countries are already taxing social media use. For example, Uganda, Benin, and Zambia already have social media taxes. And then earlier in the month was the Africa IGF in Khartoum, Sudan, and a lot of issues were discussed, among them Africa's position to the high-level panel on digitalization, also, community networks as an alternative to connecting the unconnected. And at the end of the meeting, the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group that is tasked with organizing the 2019 Africa IGF was announced. Also this month, the Mauritian Data Protection Authority convened the first ever Data Protection Summit for Africa. The summit was held in Mauritius, and it brought together a lot of stakeholders that are concerned with data protection. This includes data protection regulators, also government officials that are tasked with national ID, which is becoming a very common thing in Africa. There were also cloud companies, platforms, small and medium enterprises, and civil society organizations and academia. There was general agreement among participants of the meeting that Africa needed to have a harmonized data protection regime. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. That was Grace Mutungu with the updates from Africa. And we will continue with the updates from the Caribbean region. And from the Caribbean region, we will hear from Wanda Perez. She will give us a few updates on an electronic litigation system for the courts in the Caribbean region and the joint efforts of governments for a digital education push. So let's hear from the Caribbean region. Wanda.
Hello everyone, Wanda Perez with Caribbean Updates. The Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, Ecsc, is implementing an integrated electronic litigation system within all courts in all the 9 member organizations of the Eastern Caribbean states for the electronic management of cases. The e-litigation solution is a web-based application that will provide court users and stakeholders with access to assigned services anytime, anywhere, and on any device. This portal will serve as the platform to improve the delivery of justice to the citizens of the region and contributes towards increasing the transparency of court services, allowing the Ecsc to improve access to its services to stakeholders. Low student performance, poor teacher training, and high dropout rates are some of the significant challenges faced by Latin America and the Caribbean region in educational arena. Governments in the region have explored the use of educational technologies to address some of these challenges, spending billions of US dollars on digital devices to improve education in the last years. However, these investments have typically led to limited improvements in learning performance. An initiative coordinated by Centro Ceibal para el Estudio de las Tecnologías Digitales en la Educación, Fundación Ceibal, aims to generate relevant policy knowledge to facilitate more inclusive, equitable, and quality education through digital tools. It will build a network of researchers and policymakers to produce knowledge and recommendations to inform policy and interventions in digital education. International Development Research Centre will invest $1.3 million Canadian dollars during the 3 years of the project, while Fundación Ceibal and the National Research and Innovation Agency of Uruguay will be contributing $1.5 million US dollars during the same period. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wanda. That was Wanda Perez with the updates from the Caribbean region. And the next update, and the last one in this batch, is an update from the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa region. We will hear from Noha Fatih. She will update us on a new report of Freedom of the Net 2018. Some MENA countries are up, some countries are down on this list. So let's hear from Noha.
Hello, this is Noha Fatih. I cover internet governance developments in the Middle East and North Africa region. The first update in November is regarding Freedom on the Net 2018 report that sheds light on the improvement and decline of internet freedom in the MENA region. Freedom House released its annual publication, Freedom on the Net 2018, under the title The Rise of Digital Authoritarianism. Out of the 65 countries assessed in Freedom on the Net, 26 experience a deterioration in internet freedom that are mostly related to elections in half of the countries, and 19 demonstrated minor improvements. In the MENA region, improvements were tracked in Bahrain, Jordan, Libya, and Syria, and declines were reported in Egypt, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and Sudan. Some of the key findings regarding the region highlights that the biggest movers in the region are Egypt and Jordan, where internet freedom was improved in Jordan and declined in Egypt. The report also denotes that among the biggest offenders to internet freedom is Iran and Syria, following China. The second update is regarding EU officials urged to raise Turkey's freedom of expression crisis during EU-Turkey high political dialogue. 9 international organizations sent an open letter to the European delegation engaged in a high-level political dialogue with Turkey, calling upon them to put forward the crisis of freedom of expression in Turkey. The letter refers to the clampdown on journalists and media outlets through the introduction of new legislation, closures of media outlets, prosecutions of journalists, and the dismissal of 10,000 media workers. The 9 organizations further denounced the lack of recognition of the impact of repression on Turkish journalists and civil society, particularly by ignoring the rulings of the European Court of Human Rights by the Turkish authorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Noha. That was Noha Fatih with the updates from the MENA region, and with that we conclude this part with the regional updates from with local hubs and regional updates around the world. Lada, back to you.
Thank you, Arvin. Thanks for the great regional updates. We see the variety of topics, not only at a global level but also on the regional levels, which is quite interesting. At the end, there were a couple of other comments we received also via YouTube channel, but basically one was reminding, when it comes to the African perspective, that Africa has also the Convention on Security and Data Protection, Privacy and Data Protection. No other comments or questions in the chat, so I guess we can call it a day, or call it a month, or even call it a year, because this is the last briefing of this year. Once again, we won't meet at the end of December. We'll meet again in end of January, when we are going to reflect on the previous year, on 2018, probably come up with some forecasts, at least our estimations, what will happen in 2019. So happy holidays. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Marilia, Serena, Arvin, for excellent inputs, and to all the colleagues from the regional hubs. And see you in January. Happy holidays. Bye-bye.